Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Asia Society's Texas Center Women's Leadership Series for Technology Trailblazers. Tonight we'll be having a wide-ranging discussion with three distinguished women on topics including overcoming barriers to entering tech, women in innovation, and much else besides. Before we begin, I want to paint a picture of how important tech is nowadays. By some estimates, tech firms now account for more than half of all US economic growth. Of the other half, about 80% is also attributable to technology in some other form, usually automation, information, communications, etc. Tech is what is driving America forward. Since about 1980, we've had this structural shift in the US economy, and this is now the way it is. There's no going back. The five biggest firms are all now tech firms. Some of them are almost worth $1 trillion. There is now a thing called the 13-digit club. Yeah. Back when I was running my second startup, people dreamed of having a unicorn, a $1 billion exit. Now we're talking about trillion-dollar firms. But there's some things going on in tech that aren't quite right. We need more startups. How do we get them? Well, it turns out that one of the ways to get them is to get more women. From 1980 to today, the rate of women's participation in the executive teams of startups has gone from 4% to 14%. At the current rate, we'll hit parity somewhere around 2170. Not quite where we'd like to be. More than half of all firms are male-only at any point in history, and right now it's about 2/3 are male-only. Women-only firms have never peaked above 2.3% of startups. Women's startups are different from men's. This accounts for some of this, but not all of this. Women seem to favor different sectors. They like consumer goods. They like health and biosciences. They don't seem to do semiconductors. They don't seem to do communications. They don't seem to do industrials. And some of this seems correlated with STEM education and other things in the world. Women seem to get less investment for their firms than men, even holding some of these differences constant. But when you hold their investment constant, they perform the same. So that's our hope, that we can give more money to more women and do better. Economic growth is not doing too well in the US right now. We're stuck between about 1.5% and 2%. Tech is the driver. How do we get more tech? The answer is more women. So we're going to hear firsthand from three very accomplished women today about their experiences, and we hope that you'll be inspired to join this revolution. I understand there are lots of students here in the audience, some from Rice, some from U of H, some from St. Thomas, and some from a girls' school called Incarnate Academy. We welcome you here, and we hope that we're able to inspire you to move forward. So, without further ado, beginning with recapping Grace Rodriguez from Station Houston, Susie Lee, a tech entrepreneur and artist extraordinaire, is that fair? And Shirin Sharif from LinkedIn. Can I ask each of you in turn, starting with you, Susie, can I ask how you got involved in this exciting world? Can I say something about your journey of how you got here? Oh, sorry, Grace, my bad. I know Grace too, so that's particularly embarrassing.
So my first exposure to code was in 8th grade, taking a course in BASIC. I don't know how many of you actually remember that language. But at some point, I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. So I went to school as pre-med, doing cognitive neuroscience research. Decided I didn't want anyone to die. So I transferred to design school and pursued fashion design. And then after that, realized that neuroscience and design translated really well into branding and marketing. So I was doing marketing in New York on Wall Street, and I got burned out and decided I wanted to move to the West Coast. And in the meantime, I was going to go visit my parents in Sugar Land, and came to the Houston area in 2000. And never left because I fell in love with everybody here. I got recruited, well, a few friends of mine are DJs, so they just started the Cracker Nuts group and asked me if I would manage them, so we did that. And while working with them, I got recruited to write and become an editor for Rice Attic magazine, which was a small magazine focused on the Asian American community, and where I met Debbie Chen, who asked me to be on the board of OCA Greater Houston, and got really involved in the Asian American community by working with Gordon Kwan when he was at City Council, and fell in love with just the community and supporting the community. Let's see, this was in the mid-2000s now. As Twitter launched and Facebook launched, I found living in Sugar Land, the best way for me to connect with people who shared similar passions was using those platforms. So I started to connect with more people who were in tech and in the startup community through Twitter and then Facebook. And then we started meeting at places like Coffee Grounds downtown, and then Caroline Collective in the Museum District, and then got more involved in the co-working community in Houston as it was growing. And along the way, I met Aziz Gilani, who is a partner now at, I don't remember his title, at Mercury Fund, who introduced me to Blair Guru, who's a managing director at Mercury Fund. And they asked me if I would join their team. So I was working with Mercury, learning about the investment side of supporting startups. And the idea was I would help the startups with branding and marketing as they were raising the next fund. Well, it turned out it took a lot longer than they expected to raise that next fund. So I started working with Culture Pilot, a branding and design agency, and we took on a lot of startup clients. We ended up branding the Surge Accelerator. And then Blair contacted me after Culture Pilot, let's say. I started working for TED. So if you guys are familiar with TED Talks, I was working with them as the creative director for the TED Active Conference and got exposed to more people who are doing really interesting things and learned that tech touches everything, right? So it's not just the idea of developing a startup company or doing code. There are a lot of really creative people who are using technology in very different and interesting ways. So at some point in that time, Blair asked me to meet with Emily Keaton, who had just exited her company, Flavor. And she was interested in this idea of building a co-working space or kind of a hub to bring the tech community together, because there was nothing that was really serving early stage entrepreneurs. There was the Houston Technology Center, which was helping small to mid-sized companies, but there was nothing that was really for the guys with the ideas, or no girls and the ladies with the ideas too. So we met, we ended up developing the brand and the idea, and Kirk Coburn, who started the Surge Accelerator, which was an energy-focused startup accelerator here, let us use their space while he was raising another fund or thinking about the next cohort. And we launched 2 years ago within a 5,000 square foot space. Within about a month, we were outgrowing that. So in October, we moved to a 25,000 square foot space downtown, and now we're outgrowing that. And so we're at over 400 members now. We have, out of 275 member companies, 26% are women or women-owned. Women entrepreneurs are women-owned. And that's up from December, which was 20%. So we're growing rapidly. We're trying to encourage more women entrepreneurs to join us. So if you're interested, please see me after this.
Thank you very much for that. For those of you that sort of don't know this world, Station has had a very, very big impact here in Houston. And we're hoping that this continues to drive forward into the future. Susie, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, like Grace, I started out in the medical track. That was really important for my parents. And then, this audience gets it. Yeah. And then actually it was a very peripatetic kind of flow where I went from that into, decided not to do that and went into education and public school education and taught chemistry. And then from there, made another detour and became an artist, and in fact actually did a piece about 3 years ago here in Houston with the University of Houston's Mitchell Center. You could argue that trajectory is just about being financially less stable. And that my parents definitely also agree with. But I think for me, the thing that I really liked was that there was an increasing sense of personal agency and this idea that I would be the one that could make my own path. And so becoming a tech entrepreneur was kind of this natural thing where when I look at the world, whether it's as an educator or as an artist or as an entrepreneur, if I don't like something, then I want to change it. And there are many women that I know that are incredibly inspiring who have that same mentality where they think, this is not right, and either for my family or for my, from the community that I serve, I want to do better. And so I had looked currently, or at the time that I was starting my tech company, I don't know if you guys know Tinder. Oh yeah, okay, so. That had just started and was increasing in popularity, but this idea that women and men were having a very different experience online was something that was not very familiar. And so my understanding of online dating, which was actually to me a very interesting metaphor for a larger dynamic in society about how we were being increasingly transactional about our relationships, as well as almost having a consumerist identity in dating and in the ways that we look at our relations. And I found that really upsetting in some ways and disturbing, and thought, there has to be a way that we can use technology to actually amplify our humanity. And the way that I think of technology in its most broad and inspiring perspective is to say that technology is a tool. And therefore, just like a surgeon, you can use a knife to either save somebody or, in the hands of someone else, you can kill somebody. So when you think of technology in this way, then the idea is, in whose hands do you want this technology and this tool to actually become a thing? And so that's why we started this company, and the idea was to try and amplify a certain kind of humanity that we didn't see basically in the course of love.
Thank you. We'll talk about Saren again later on, if that's okay with you, but Shireen.
Yeah, I'd say that my journey into technology was actually very unintentional. I was a public policy major at Stanford, wanted to go into government, did a bunch of internships there, got really jaded, and then didn't know what I wanted to do. Consulting called out to me, as it often does when you don't know what you want to do with your life. And so I joined Boston Consulting Group. I was there for 5 years, with business school in between. And then, I also interned at Amazon while I was at business school, and that was probably my first exposure to a technology company. And I realized, I was doing operations there, and I realized that technology brought together, at a tech firm, brought together a lot of the most interesting parts of operations, which are growth, speed of growth, cost of growth, and data. And all of those things make operations so much more interesting when you have companies that are growing fast, when you have goods that are digital with zero marginal cost of production, and when you have an industry that's booming, as we talked about earlier, and then lots of data to analyze to help you make better operational and business decisions. And so that was the first time I was like, wow, technology is actually a pretty cool industry for me to pursue. When I finally decided to leave consulting, that's when I decided, I wanted to go into technology and in the operational space in particular. And that's how I ended up at LinkedIn. And so I've now been there for about 5 years. For me, technology, I wanted a bigger company. As you can probably tell from my resume, I'm very risk averse. And so a bigger company provided that stability for me. Obviously, LinkedIn's now been acquired by Microsoft, so I have even more stability in my life. And then what I will say, though, is Hong forgot to mention that you should also post your pictures from tonight on LinkedIn. So don't forget.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's start with STEM and business education. This is, as Hong mentioned, this is one of the things that we think is a key driver. If people are educated in the right way, maybe that changes the world. But maybe it doesn't matter. So maybe, I guess, Shireen, first of all, with you are an MBA, and from Harvard Business School, no less. Did your MBA open doors for you? Was it worth it?
It definitely opened doors. So my manager who hired me and who I still work for actually also went to HBS. The person she worked for at the time also went to HBS. So I'd say that network and that exposure is certainly worthwhile. I'd say actually when I graduated from business school, though, it was actually almost a negative sometimes for most tech companies, especially startups, because tech was all about entrepreneurship and business school was all about tradition and finance and the establishment, the man, the CEO, that very traditional stereotype of business school. I'd say now it's changing a lot. Tech companies are actually, getting bigger and bigger and are running a lot of business. And so you actually need MBAs to help run companies. And so I think that that's a nice synergy. But to your point, you definitely don't need it, especially in San Francisco. You're seeing a massive plethora of like coding academies, General Assembly, all these coding boot camps. So I have plenty of friends who, didn't have a STEM education but wanted to learn how to code, and it's very accessible. There are startups right now who will actually like educate you, teach you how to code, teach you about engineering, and innovative financial arrangements where like your education's free and they take a percentage of your first year salary or whatever it is. So really like unique opportunities for people at any stage of their career to get into technology, and it's becoming more accessible. And I'm seeing all of my business school classmates and other classmates just joining tech because it is actually very lucrative, very fast paced. The salaries are much higher than they are in most other industries. The margins are higher from a business perspective, so definitely worth it.
And less likely to be replaced by a robot.
Well, we'll create the robots replace ourselves.
Replace everybody else, yes. So Susie, despite, I didn't know you taught chemistry, that's somewhat impressive. Despite teaching chemistry, I think of you as an artist first and an entrepreneur second. Can you talk about the commonalities between those two paths, and were you missing anything coming from art, or did art give you creative problem solving?
Well, I think like Shireen said, you don't really need to have a formal degree, and I think when we look at like Asian culture, we all think that we need to have a certain kind of external validation in order to take these next steps, and whether that's a degree or certain kind of training, we're sort of in a brave new world where I think what's optimistic is that you can take the skills that you have. And what I've seen in the entrepreneurial world is like you can be a mother for 15 years and those skills can apply to your business idea. And in fact, everything that you've done for those 15 years are absolutely necessary and important in an entrepreneurial sense. I came into art actually without formal training either. So for me, the idea that there's this iterative, very dynamic approach to problem solving is much more interesting than saying you have this toolbox and maybe or maybe not you're going to use the tools. And there was an art professor of mine who actually said when I was kind of doubting my skills, and he said, Susie, you will learn the skills you need when you need them. And I've always sort of taken that to heart and realized that that's really the case. So whether it's advisors or a community of people or using social media to actually learn the skills that you do need, it's absolutely out there, and that shouldn't be the impediment to starting that first step.
No, thank you. And Grace, you work with RISE, with U of H, with a bunch of institutions here that work with students. What do you advise them? Do you say specialize? Do you say go broad?
I say follow your curiosity, right? Experiment and build things, because a lot of people say follow your passion, but then people focus on, well, what's my passion? They try to go down that route. But as you can tell from my background, it is all over the place, right? I didn't have one career track or career path. And what I found was, especially being Asian American, you get used to code switching, and you get used to seeing what people respond better to. And so if people found out, when they looked at my resume and were like, well, you're not, you bounce around a lot, why do you do that? When they found out, though, I went to Columbia, all of a sudden, oh, you actually might know what you're doing. And so they would take me a little more seriously. So it's kind of finding out what resonates with some people and being able to adapt to that. And then knowing that you're resilient, you can learn what you need to do, learn what you need to learn, or have the skills, basically, when you need them. That's the most important thing, because going to what Shireen said, when I was at Mercury and somebody with an MBA sent us a business plan, it was like, oh, versus somebody said, well, I built this and it didn't work, and this is the next thing I'm doing, and this is what I learned from that, and it's like, this is actually interesting, because they've learned from actually building something. So the track record of what you've built, the projects that you've created, the teams that you've worked with or built yourself is actually more impressive to investors from my experience than your resume these days. And the other thing is, a lot of the jobs that happen tomorrow or that exist tomorrow don't exist today. Data science, I don't know if that was actually a job title when I was a kid, but I know it's one now. And there's my titles for the past at least 7 years have been invented. So I've been a creative juicer. I've been director of special operations. And now I'm CXO. That's the title that's been invented. Create the career path that resonates with you.
So just staying with this for just a moment, Shireen said, go to a Code Academy class. Maybe do an MBA, not that you're necessarily suggesting that. There's lots of different ways into this industry. You can go take an internship with a tech firm. You can just start a startup. What would you say? Is there any good advice that carries across? Should everybody learn to code?
I'd say find a really interesting problem. So one of our best success stories at Station Houston is of John Kennedy. John started a company called Mesa Digital while he was in high school. So he's going to St. John's. For a school project, he had to go to a school, I believe it was in the 3rd or 5th ward, and then do research and find out what are some of the challenges that the school is facing. And he found that across HISD, I believe it was like maybe there's one school counselor to every 1,000 students. And so we thought, well, maybe I can create an app or a platform that can help students stay on track to graduate. And now HISD is one of his clients. And now he's thinking, should I go to college? I want the college experience. But he has investors telling him, we'll give you money to not go to college and continue growing the startup. So I think that's it. If there's something that you're really interested in pursuing and you see a problem that you want to solve, then try to solve it. And do it on the side. Make sure that you're doing well in school. Make sure that you're taking care of the things you need to take care of still. But pursue it. I
think one thing that works, especially if you have kind of an internal monologue that has a lot of self-doubt or of talking yourself out of ideas, is to speak things into existence. And the reason that works is that it becomes a mirror that when you say your ideas to other people and you get the response, like Grace was saying, of someone saying, wow, that's really interesting, or, oh, you must have done this, and so therefore you must be good at that. I find that actually oftentimes is kind of the way to start the momentum going. And it's encouraging. And also, I think for me as an Asian, guilt is also a really motivating factor. So once I speak it into existence, then people are like, well, how about that thing that you were doing? And if you weren't doing it, then you were like, right, I've got to go back to doing that.
And final thought there, I think, if you want to be successful, you have to be good at what you do, right? And so you have to find that thing that you're good at. If you hate coding, yes, you could actually do it, make money, help there be more women coders, but you're not going to be good enough to, win. For me, I was a mediocre consultant, quite honestly. I was always in the middle of my class. I did okay, but I was never the best consultant out there because I just didn't care about what I was doing. And then when I really reflected and I was like, operations is good for me. And the reason I came to that conclusion was because I just looked at myself and my personality. I was always the person who optimized my walk home. I hated stopping at a stoplight, and so I had to optimize and be super efficient in that walk home. I was really impatient. I didn't like inefficiency. And so my personality kind of led me to operations, and now I get paid to do something that I get to solve problems and fix things in a technology or in a sales environment, and I'm good at it because I really care. And so for me, I think that's the most important thing as you're trying to figure out what to do and how to get there, is find those things that people will pay you to do that you just enjoy doing anyway.
Right. Very good advice. I'm also a compulsive optimizer. I find it very distracting to hear other people talk about compulsively optimizing. My sister is also an entrepreneur, and I just wanted to reflect on one of the things that Susie said, which is, say it out loud. Don't be afraid of failing. My sister, who still loves me despite what I'm about to tell you, would pitch a business idea to me, give or take, every 2 weeks for about 5 years. And my answer would generally be no, or something along those lines. She's now doing very well. She runs an HR consulting firm for startups. They've just passed the $1 million a year revenue marker. She's doing great. Put your thoughts out into the world and let other people criticize them. The criticism is productive. Okay, so moving on then, let's talk about women's products and products for women, which is, there's a whole market here that is not being well served. Susie's firm Siren closed its doors, but after losing a lot of other people's money, which is a huge win in our world. If you don't manage to lose anybody's money, you're not really succeeding. If you lose a lot of other people's money, that's like 95th percentile. This is what I tell myself every night. But Susie's firm was different. It focused on women's products. She realized there was a value in the world that she could see. And can I get you to just, maybe starting with you, Susie, can I get you to think, how big is this market? Should these products be designed by women? What is missing here?
Oh, well, I mean, whenever you look at anything and you're like, that clearly was not designed by a woman, right? And every woman here is nodding, and you can talk about 10, 15 products that you know off the top of your head. There's a small baby cooing right now. That's my 4-month-old. And now I'm looking at all the like parent products, and I'm like... and every 10 minutes I say, that was not designed by a woman. So it's absolutely important, and I think both Shireen and Grace can talk about the idea that to have diversity at the table when you're generating ideas is absolutely important, because you may think that you're open-minded about things, but there's many things that I would think of that, for example, my male comrades wouldn't like. They just wouldn't necessarily think about it in the same way. I'm short, so I might think about something in a different way height-wise than somebody who's taller would. And so when you think about diversity in terms of perspective, there's a lot of untapped markets there. So yeah, absolutely.
Grace, your thoughts?
I think there's a lot of opportunity there, because since Silicon Valley has been kind of dominated by men for the past several years, there are so many opportunities to create new solutions to problems that women face, and you can capture at least 50% of the market for that. There's a growing group of angel investment groups, VC funds that are investing specifically in women. So you would be able to find money more easily than in the past. For instance, there's a Circular Board as an accelerator. The founder, Carolyn Rods, turned that into a platform called Hello Alice to connect entrepreneurs with resources. There's True Wealth Ventures in Austin, founded by 2 women who are looking for more women to invest in. And they're also looking at areas to invest in that are around products that specifically serve women, like they call it femtech and famtech, so for families, and also looking at solutions in the caregiving and the medical space. Shireen and I were talking about this during the break. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm actually looking at joining a startup called Honor, which is looking at home care. It's actually run by men, but one of the things I do like about it is that there are women on the exec team, and I think that that's super important, but it's in the home care space, and so, in line with the aging population and using technology to help solve that problem.
So we're going through our time much quicker than I thought I would. Let's just come back to you, Sharon, for a moment and get an insight into what it's like at a big tech firm. Tech firms are perhaps better in equal pay, equal opportunity. Could you speak about that in LinkedIn, and do you think it's representative of the rest of the industry?
Sure. I feel very fortunate because I think LinkedIn's great. I think it definitely depends on the company and the leadership. But our leadership team is super focused on diversity, inclusion, belonging. These are terms we use all the time at the company. We always publish our diversity report, how many women we have in senior roles. We have initiatives called the Women's Initiative, Women at LinkedIn, Wally, and so we have all these support groups to help. As part of Women's Initiative, it's actually for more senior level women, and you get nominated in, and you actually get an executive coach. So they pay for one-on-one leadership coaching for women, which is like a huge opportunity. I also got assigned a sponsor at the company who was, higher level than me, who could speak for me in meetings and find opportunities for me that I might not seek out myself, because women tend not to be as good as like volunteering themselves for cool new things, and so they pair you with someone who will do that for you. The head of my department, the VP, Mike Gamson, super inspiring. He's a white male, but is really comfortable talking about the fact that, there's room for more women in the organization. I remember when I first went to one of these, it was like a recognition event, and all the hosts in front of the room were all white men. And he actually apologized for that. Like, it was very obvious to all of us in the audience, but it was really cool that an executive would recognize it and say, I'm really sorry about this, and I commit to you that in a few years, I want this room to look very different, and I want the host to look very different. He also has committed to the company that he will never speak on a panel where there are no women panelists. He won't invest. He's made a lot of money off LinkedIn and Microsoft, but he won't invest in companies that don't have women on the exec team. He won't serve on boards for companies that don't have women on the exec team. And so I think when you're at a big company, you're afforded the luxury of thinking about those things. And there's just like much more room and need for it because, LinkedIn is hiring hundreds of thousands of people a year, as is Microsoft. If we don't invest in women, like, it's a bad business decision. And so I think it just gets easier with that.
So that segues very nicely into the most important question of all. What should we be doing? What should men be doing? What should women be doing? Is there structural problems? Do we need to change the working environment? Do we need to change the rules of the game? Can I ask your thoughts, Grace, Susie?
Well, I think that some of what Shireen is talking about, there's an implicit bias here that when you hear some of these things, you automatically also assume that somehow women need extra help. But it's not that they need extra help, it's that intrinsically the system has made it so that men naturally have these networks that they can rely on who will organically sponsor them, right? Who will be their mentors and actually coach them and train them when they're quite green. So by formalizing this, that's really how we're trying to make the game more equitable, is simply to say, these are what we're seeing in play organically in a male-dominated system, and so therefore we need to now put certain things in play formally that's decreed by the companies in order for it to actually happen for women. So I think a really important aspect is for both men and women to check your kind of implicit systemic biases that you have that somehow make you think, oh, well, women seem to need extra help, or they have other reasons that they can't do X, Y, and Z, and that's really absolutely not the case. And so, as Ed was saying, like, when you take all of these variables and kind of cross them out, the execution is pretty much the same and the performance is the same.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. A lot of the biases come from what came before, right? We have a legacy of infrastructure. If you think about the way the school day is structured, it's from 8 to 3 p.m., and the caregiving tends to fall upon women, so you can't really take a full day job, or you have to take out time to pick up the kids from school. Just changing the way the school system works would probably free up more women to actually participate in work. Or maybe more flexible work environments. Why do we have to be at work from 9 to 5 or whatever those specific hours are? In creating spaces that are more welcoming and friendly to and workable for women entrepreneurs. We were talking early on about having a wellness room so that young mothers or new mothers could pump, right? Or you could have a place where you could take a nap, right? It's for everybody. There's a wellness room. And I got pushback on, well, I don't know, the men might feel uncomfortable about that. It's just kind of a weird default that instead of seeing like how can we make this work for everybody, it was more about it might make somebody else uncomfortable at having a wellness room. We also talked about the idea of having a gaming space or some place that was communal, and everybody was pushing for a ping pong table because all the guys in Silicon Valley had ping pong tables, and it was kind of disturbing where people were more concerned about having a ping pong table than having a wellness room. So pushing for different cultural norms, right? Trying to change the game, so that everybody can play and everybody can have a great time playing together. I think that's where I'm coming from with trying to create new spaces.
Thank you. So we'd like to offer the audience the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. Are there people in the audience that would like to ask something now? Give us 1 second, we'll get a microphone right down to you.
Okay, I'd love to get one or all of your opinions on net neutrality.
Yes.
Agreed.
That's the biggest challenge is how do you get everybody? The internet can't. Everybody says, well, we have the internet, right? So everybody has access to education. Well, if you don't have access to the internet, then that's a problem. And if your internet is throttled, one of the reasons why people are saying that it's harder for people to get education in places where you don't have broadband is because streaming video takes a long time, or it's not quality, or it gets choppy, so you can't really watch a course online the way somebody else with easy access can. So yeah.
I made an assumption. I just realized that everybody in the room knew what net neutrality is. And since you guys are in tech, would you explain to everybody what net neutrality is? Because as a scientist, I just may mess it up. So I'd rather let you guys explain.
Maybe I'll take this one. So
Okay.
net neutrality, broadly speaking, is not discriminating against packets. If you can discriminate against women or other things, but not against packets. That is, we don't say that different packets will have different speeds, or we'll have different latencies, we'll get there at different times. That is, there is no control over the traffic. You can't restrict certain types of traffic or charge more for it. A neutral net is one that is, all packets are equal, effectively.
And so the danger to that is if you throttle it, so let's say, Verizon, right, can charge you more if you use more bandwidth, if you have faster speeds, then people who can't afford that don't have the same access to. Yeah.
To the lady there.
How do you bring your leadership and your ideas and your examples to politics and policy in this country?
Wonderful question. So I'm just gonna preempt Grace here. We have Amanda Edwards, who is a city councilwoman who is running the task forces for Houston startups. We have a series of notable women that are in key roles here in Houston, including Barbara Berger, who runs Chevron Technology Ventures, Gina Lunar, who's at the GHP. With all of this, not just the policy, but women too. Grace, can you say anything about this?
Well, I'll back up a little bit too. When Ed Gonzalez was at City Council, I worked with him to start the first Mayor's Innovation and Technology Advisory Committee. And then when Amanda Edwards went into office, she and my co-founder, John Reale, started the new Mayor's Innovation Technology Task Force. And they've been advising the mayor and local government on how can you use technology and open source technologies to help the city, and to help solve some of these problems. I think our local government is definitely lending an ear to it. The mayor gave us a blessing on this new organization called Houston Exponential, which is a merger of that Mayor's Innovation Technology Task Force, the Greater Houston Partnerships Innovation Roundtable, and the Houston Technology Center. So now you're coalescing that. We're trying to think through how can technology help, right? And how can we make technology more accessible to everybody? As far as bringing it towards policy, if you have ideas, please bring them to at least me. I will definitely listen, but I'll make sure that it gets heard. I think the most important part of this is, the biggest piece of advice I can give to all of you is raise your hand. I've given flack to my friend John Nordby, who was at the Greater Houston Partnership and now works with Houston Exponential, about the diversity, right? Because you walk into the boardroom at the partnership and it definitely doesn't look like this. And he said, we want more diversity. How do we get diversity? I'm like, you go where they are and you invite them in because they don't know the door is open. They don't know you want them unless you go out there and you say, hey, the door is open. We want you to come in. So I think if you are interested in getting involved and providing some more ideas on how tech can help, or the tech community can help, the startup community can help, please show up. The Houston Exponential is doing this series of town halls around the city. If you look up houstonexponential.org, they're looking for more committee members. So if you're interested in serving on a committee, there are at least 10 of them right now. One of them is image, one is education, which is, those are really important. How do we change the perception of Houston? But they're definitely open. There's been a shift in embracing more people's opinions, embracing more diverse ideas.
Shirin, Susie, anything to add, particularly at the national level, or any thoughts? Not really. How about a more difficult topic? Let's very, very briefly talk about Me Too and Time's Up and things that are going on in the national sphere. How is this impacting tech?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, especially in San Francisco, you know, very prominent. It's what people are talking about. I think I think that the level of awareness is awesome. For the first time, you know, people, women especially, have a voice. I think that level of awareness makes it okay to speak up. It makes it, people just understand more and are more aware of how their actions impact others. And so I think, you know, it's definitely starting a dialogue, and that's what we need. I do believe, hopefully I'm not being, you know, overly optimistic, but I do believe this is an inflection point which will lead to change. I think that awareness and that ability to speak up is what women and others just needed to hear. And so, you know, it's definitely starting a wave. I think it becomes even more important as a leader now to talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, though. So, you know, as a manager of real people, like, it's actually a little harder because you have to, like, think about more things now, and people ask harder questions, and you've got to figure out how to answer that. So I think we actually need a lot more, you know, coaching and guidance to our managers and our leaders of organizations, but it's great. It's a great change that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think also to the point of like policy and change, I mean, Me Too is part of this. I mean, and all of you are familiar with this idea and this movement. And if you're not, basically it's that there have been a lot of crappy men doing a lot of crappy things to women for many, many years. And it's finally coming out. But I think that the idea is that, you know, there's a certain kind of inertia and laziness that was allowing this to kind of fester. And finally, everyone is basically saying, enough. And we need change. And that change actually happens not only at a policy level, but also as an individual level. And, you know, these hard questions are actually even questions of taking an accounting of your own soul. Like, where are you trying to make things better and to change as an individual, and not to be fearful of these things, because there is a better place that we will come out of if we all decide we don't want this anymore.
And to add just a little bit to that, it showed the flaws in the system. It showed that the system was broken, because I think previously, whenever a story would come up, you would think, oh, that's an isolated incident. But now, with so many women coming out through the Me Too movement and sharing their stories, people are now seeing how systemic and how broad it was. And it has led to more women being taken seriously. And I think that's a very positive thing, that women are now that we are being taken seriously, now we can start saying, well, these are all the issues, and we can't address them all at the same time, but, you know, at least let's acknowledge that they exist. And let's start solving these problems together. You know, you talked about allies, and you had mentor and sponsors before, but I think that's one of the most important things that we can all do, is either look for a mentor or be a mentor, look for a sponsor or be a sponsor, look for peers. A lot of times there's a danger of things being polarizing, where it's just like it's us against them, but I think the more that we see it's us and them, and we are working towards this. You know, I hesitate to say that it's bad men, but it's bad behavior, definitely. And it's men who've been doing it for a really long time, where it's just a part of them. But I don't think everybody is you know, 100% bad. It's just, how do we start making it unacceptable to do that behavior and to continue supporting or letting that behavior slide? So
we had a call about a week ago, and one of you pointed out to me that men don't mentor women enough. So you know, it's not just bad attention, it's also not good attention, right? That one of the ways that we can change this world, a lot of men will mentor new men, but couldn't you just step up and mentor a young lady? And I after you told me this, I realized I've almost been guilty of it myself. I mean, I have a lot of students, I try to get them all equal attention, but naturally the guys self-select into, you know, I want to come do research with you, yeah. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Yes, lady down the front here.
So, welcome to all of you. We have so many students here in the audience. What would you recommend as far as courses that they could consider taking, career paths, maybe internships, or certain areas that you may have, you know, wished you had done or maybe did do, that you could sort of guide them, maybe to assist them? Because many people go into careers for tech or take classes, but sometimes they have to go through several years of doing things before they actually get to where they realize they want to be. So what would you guide them in that area?
I have a pretty easy and relevant one. Make sure you have a LinkedIn profile. Make sure you have a photo on your LinkedIn profile. Those are easy ones. Headlines on your LinkedIn profile. I know I'm being slightly facetious here, but it actually does matter. I mean, part of my job is actually selling our product to recruiters and HR, and tech is obviously a big part of that. And it is your public identity, and it's it's not your Facebook profile, so take it seriously. Put courses that you've done on there. Make sure you take classes on. We have a LinkedIn learning platform now. You can gain skills on the platform. We have publishing. You can actually publish your own work if you have thoughts, and that's a great way to get exposure. Sharing. You can share videos now. You can share PowerPoint presentations, photos, creative work is very welcome. And so I do think that that's a very easy and small first step.
I think also for students, it's not just taking the classes, but it is being proactive about engaging in a dialogue with your professors and advisors, and really seeking them out to develop a relationship, because we all know how powerful our networks are. And when I look back at my college and grad school careers, I had amazing professors that I just sort of sat passively and took notes, but never went up after class and said, could I, take you to coffee and ask about X, Y, and Z? And if I could do it over again, I absolutely would have done that. So, I always tell the students that I talk to, especially if you're in a smaller class, absolutely take advantage of that knowledge. And as young women, I think it tends to be something where there might be a slight intimidation factor, and overcome that and just start that conversation, because the worst that they can say is, no, I don't have enough time.
I would say take a class that requires you to do poetry, because a lot of developers will tell you that poetry is code, because it teaches you how to edit, and coding is about getting clean, streamlined commands in there so you can edit. It teaches you how to think. Also, do something that requires you to be in a lab and experiment, because the scientific method is one of the best ways to learn how to have a hypothesis, try something, do it, and then learn from it. And that will make you one of the best entrepreneurs on the planet if you can just do that. And make sure that you network, you build a community of peers, and it's not just of other students, but absolutely talk to your teachers and engage in that conversation.
So likewise, I would say go broad. Being an entrepreneur is not just about knowing marketing, or just about knowing finance, or just about knowing engineering, or just whatever. You need it all. The more the better.
Can I add one more thing? And if you go online and you find websites that you like, right-click and view source, and then see what it's built on, because there's so many languages out there that if you really want to do code, find the language that you can actually build a lot of really interesting things that you're passionate about on.
And a reoccurring theme through these answers, perhaps with the exception of LinkedIn, entrepreneurship is experiential learning. Go and do it. Learn how to code. Learn how to put yourself forward with your professor. Go and engage. You've actually got to experience the thing. That would be my advice. Put yourself forward and actually do it. Yes. Can we take someone from up at the back there? Maybe the lady in the really difficult to get to orange shirt. Is that possible? How about we take the gentleman right there in the meantime while we're getting to her? Oh, you're good. Go. Ask.
Hi. How do you manage imposter syndrome if you've ever faced it in either yourselves or people that you mentor?
Could you say it again a little with the microphone a little closer? Sorry.
How do you manage imposter syndrome if you've ever experienced it yourselves or in people that you mentored?
Oh, totally. Probably right now at this moment. Why am I on this panel with these awesome people here? I mean, you can acknowledge it first and say, yes, it's in the room, and that's fine. But then I think, it's this idea that you just do it, right? Because if the imposter syndrome, I think, the thing that's debilitating about it is that it stops you from doing something, right? And so if you try to think about what is the worst thing that can happen, the worst is usually things like, they won't answer the email, or they'll say no, or I'm sorry, I can't do it, but maybe some other time. And that these are not the most scary outcomes to have. And and probably a little bit of sense of humor. So eventually you realize, like, oh, I'm doing that script again, and making fun of yourself a little bit.
If you lose $10 million of other people's money, eventually you will wake up and go, yeah, I lost $10 million of other people's money. It's okay. It's okay to fail. Failing is good in this world.
And I would just add, be authentic. Make it part of yourself. I think it's actually really great as a leader to share your fears because other people have fears too. And so I agree, just put it out there. I think in my career, I got promoted once and I became a manager to people who used to be my peers. And that was really hard. It's like weird to, become someone's boss who used to be your equal. And you're like, whoa, this doesn't feel right. But like I shared that with them. I was like, I might mess up here. I'm really sorry. I want you to be really honest with me. If I'm a terrible manager, tell me. And I think they appreciated that honesty because it was weird for them too. And so I think it's just part of who you are. And as women, that's actually pretty unique about us that we're willing to share some of those fears. So I think it just adds to our broader, compassion and empathy.
One more thing is to know what you have to offer. Because if you know, like, I'm not good at all those other things, but I'm good at this one thing, it gives you a little bit more confidence. Fun fact, when I was working for Gordon and we would go to an event, people would always think I was either his intern or his daughter instead of the community liaison. But I would just talk to them as if you were my peer. These were people who were senior officials and all the rest. And I heard one of his friends told me once, "You're very mature for your age," and I was in my early 30s, right? It was just like the kind of confidence you just take it with a grain of salt and show up. Because I'm really nervous. I'm shaking right now.
Thank you. The gentleman right here, yes.
Hi, Susie, Grace, and Shireen. Thank you for you guys coming out tonight and being willing to speak to us. My name is Christian. I'm here with the University of Houston, the SURE program. We consult under-resourced entrepreneurs in the Third Ward, so we're very happy to be here. I had the luck to invest in cryptocurrencies back in 2013, so 2017 was a fun year. But I used some of that money to buy a tutoring company that I used to work here for in Houston. So we tutor 100 students in HISD. 70% of my staff is women, and so I kind of had two questions. One was like, what can I do to empower them? Because I want them to be confident in decision making, and they don't have to call me to make decisions. I trust their intuition. So what can I do to empower them? And then what can I do to use tech within the education field? I've started running analytics, and I found that we actually donate 5% of our revenue to scholarships, because I never want money to be the reason that a student can't come and learn. But most of them use their iPads and computers, and so we need more equipment and stuff to be able to handle it. But what else can I do within the tech field to add value to the parents and to the students that attend our program?
Any thoughts?
That's a big challenge. It's really hard.
I can speak to the first one maybe. I would, very tactfully tell them that you want them to make decisions. And so when they ask you for advice or what would you do, say, how would you handle it? Like, don't answer the question back at them. And tell them that you trust them and that you support them. I think sometimes, you just want to hear that from your boss or your person that runs a company. And so it's really helpful to hear that and say, I trust your judgment. And I think that will help them just feel supported. And then let them fail. I think sometimes, empowerment is great, but it also often leads to failure. And you have to be okay with that and tell them you're okay with that. And that'll help them learn and feel, learn from however they, lead.
Yeah, the goal, give them a goal and then give them some parameters and then let them make their own decisions along the way. It's kind of like, bowling alley and you put the bumpers up, but as long as you get the ball to the end and then you can tell me what you learned from that process, I think the reporting back is really the most powerful part.
The tech question is very, very difficult, so we're going to punt on that if that's okay. We'll take one last question from the audience.
Actually, wait, could I do one thing about that, the tech question?
Sure, no, go on.
So I think that especially for underserved communities, having the technology, first of all, is really important to have it in their hands. But beyond that, I think it's really to make sure that there's a balance when you have that conversation, that the learning and the facts are all there, right? Like anyone can Google facts now. But the learning is actually a much more strategic kind of thing that absolutely is in conversation with human beings. And so the idea of how technology can rally communities, I think, is one of the most important aspects that technology can be a tool to subvert the kind of power structures that we have right now. So if everyone right now is isolated on their iPads and kind of doing their work only on their own, they won't come together and they won't consolidate all of the knowledge that they have and all of the experience that they have together in order to really make the kind of policy changes that people are asking about. So I think having some kind of philosophy or principle that says that the technology is serving community is probably the good first step.
And the lady in the middle.
Shireen, you made the comment that you should follow what you're good at. I'm an engineering student, and honestly, engineering school is kind of hard. As a first-generation student, my high school and elementary education was okay, but when I got to college, I realized other people's education was so much more advanced than mine. So my question is, when you're pursuing a passion or something that you're very interested in, how do you determine that it's time to move on? For example, you guys went through all these career paths. How do you determine when it's time to just buckle down and change your mind or say, like, I really want this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, right? You have to put your all and make this a priority. And so if engineering is your passion, you owe it to yourself to try it and put everything you've got into it, right? And I think university is a really unique time where this is what you're going to be doing. And if you're willing to, give up on other social events or, other priorities that come up and really make this your all, then that's a great time to do it. And at the end of that, you'll get to actually have a self-evaluation at the end of exams and through the job process. And honestly, I think in the form of education, there's actually no harm in pursuing it, right? If this is your passion, do it. For me, I think professionally is where it gets interesting because it's really how you apply that education. And so, some people can get really mediocre grades, but be much better in how they apply it and just be smarter about, the job itself. For me, I was never as good. I was okay at school, obviously, but I love the doing, and the doing is the fun part for me. So I'm never going to be the person who scores the best score on a test, but when it comes to applying that, I want to be the best. And so to me, I'd say you'd actually want to test yourself in a real life setting, i.e. a job, assuming you can find a job. And, if you can, then see how you do. I would wait till that step to evaluate yourself, assuming you're still enjoying that journey and it's something you want to pursue.
Susie, Grace, when do you cut your losses?
There was something that I learned in the studio as an artist, and it was when the pain of not being in the studio is greater than the pain of being in the studio, you will make the work. And so I think that that's kind of the moral calculus that you have in your head, which is at some point the pain of being in the studio becomes a hell of a lot more than the pain of not being there, and that's when you realize that you're thinking about other things. Because I've never really equated hard with being not good at something, or that easy is being good. In fact, the people who work the hardest as it makes it look easy, but it's actually really, really hard. So that effort is actually some of the joy of the thriving in something that you actually do become eventually good at.
I cut my losses when I feel like this is something I have to do versus this is something I was born to do.
Fair. Nice note to finish on too. Thank you very much.